All right. Hi, everybody. This is Lindsay Knopick, the marketing manager for Multnomah Group. I just wanted to get us started off today by welcoming Greg, our newest consultant, and this is his first jump at a webinar with us, which we're very excited for. His name is Greg Johnson. He's our senior consultant and director of ERISA Technical Services. Before I kick it over to him, I just want to remind you that you all have been muted for sound quality. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and your question will either be addressed at the time, or we may wait till the end and let Greg answer them all at once. As usual, we are recording this webinar, and we will share the slides and the recording with you within a couple of days of our presentation. So with that, I will hand it over to Greg.
All right, thank Lindsay, and welcome everyone. I think we've got a good webinar today planned for you on the Secure Act. I don't know that it'll take the full hour, and as I was preparing for this yesterday, and I had CNBC on, and I was watching the market take a second day of tumbles, I thought maybe I'd ask Eric to join, Eric Daly at the beginning here, just to give a quick update on sort of his thoughts on the market before we jump into the Secure Act. I sort of felt like it was maybe the elephant in the room a little bit. It certainly was yesterday, not as much today with the markets coming back. But Eric, do you have a few things you could just share regarding some of the turmoil we've seen in the last couple days?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. You know, if you've been paying attention, it'd be difficult not to over the course of the last 4 days or so. It's been a rough patch, as Greg alluded to. We did have a pretty strong first 6 weeks of 2020, compounding what was a tremendously strong 2019. But over the course of the last 4 days, prior to at least trading activity today, which is not yet closed, we had seen tremendous sell-off. S&P from January 1st through close of market yesterday was off 2.4%. The European FTSE index was off about 7.5%, and the Shanghai Composite was down about 2%. That was pretty broad across the country. From a causation perspective, I think obviously much is being made of the COVID-19 coronavirus and the impact. That impact is material. I think if you look at the reach of the COVID-19 virus, it certainly addresses two elements that impact the economy as a whole. One clearly is that China is a huge piece of the supply chain. Take a company like Apple, for instance, that manufactures a number of products in China. When you have to restrict and quarantine 60 million within the country, it's going to have an impact on your ability to maintain a consistent delivery supply chain. And you add to that the impact on the demand side. So just yesterday, Apple began reopening some of the Apple stores throughout China, but clearly there's at least at a very minimum a deferred consumption, if not frequently what we see as a delayed consumption is a consumption that doesn't occur. And that's going to have a pretty significant impact on the demand side for products and services. So it's not terribly surprising ultimately to see that sell-off. Although if you look at the magnitude, while the 4 days was aggressive and in a negative direction, realistically what we've been talking about with clients over the course of the end of 2019 was that with the huge equity run-up both internationally as well as domestically, ultimately the cost of securities, especially stocks here in the U.S., had become high by relative historical standards. So a 2.5% sell-off magnitude here in the U.S., given the fact that the S&P was up 34% in 2019, is not tremendously impactful. I think given the variance in the cost of future dollar of earnings for the S&P at about 18, there probably is even more room for some sell-off. When you have prices that have escalated to that degree, it's usually indicative of the fact that the economy is expecting a relatively smooth and consistent growth curve. And if nothing else, the COVID virus impacts that. There's been some written about the election. We tend to feel and have felt historically that there isn't any material correlation between elections and market performance from a party perspective. I think always markets dislike uncertainty. So whether it's the COVID virus or uncertainty relative to the election, all of those things create some of that uncertainty that would be consistent with a market decline. The third thing we would point out, though, from a reactionary perspective is as unsettling as the market performance has been over the course of the last 4 days, that ultimately it doesn't likely change strategically your approach to managing, especially a defined contribution plan, but also a defined benefit plan, that the time horizons are much longer. I think if you look back at other health-related impacts to markets, at least historically, they have not tended to be long-term impacts on markets. Clearly, as this spreads, the further concern yesterday was the CDC's comments about preparing for the likely inevitability of the spread of COVID-19 throughout the U.S., and clearly that would have an impact. The U.S. economy is roughly 2/3 consumer spending. When you reduce the ability of consumers to spend, that's going to have at least, again, a delay in GDP growth, if not a reduction over the course of the 2020 year. So, again, markets have been much more stable today, which we're obviously all thankful for. But we'll continue to watch and monitor the impact of this, both on the U.S. economy, U.S. markets, as well as the international positions that are held by our clients. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Greg.
All right, so I think the main thing there is stay the course, right?
That would be the main thing, yeah. If you were to boil that all down to 3 words, stay the course would be the 3.
All right, well, now we'll move into today's agenda, which is focusing on the SECURE Act, which SECURE stands for Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement. So that's the SECURE Act that we'll be discussing today. This was passed into law December of last year, and it really is the most substantive enhancement to America's retirement system in over 10 years. I think Congress was long overdue in making some changes. All told, I don't know how big of an impact this will have on employers. There's some sort of minor changes that will impact all plans. But I think the larger goal of the SECURE Act was really, I think, focusing on trying to get more access to retirement, to the ability to save for retirement to more Americans. And that primary focus to that, then, I think the way that they're trying to sort of attack this is to make it easier for employers to offer plans, perhaps most notably smaller employers. I think that's probably the biggest change that we're going to see. And, I think Congress is hoping that the impact will be, if they can get more employers offering plans, then we get more Americans saving in plans. So those are the biggest changes. So as we go through the agenda, I think we'll start by talking about multiple employer plans and some changes there. Talk about some tax incentives that are really focused on getting small employers to add or enhance a plan. Pretty substantive changes regarding lifetime income options. And I think what you're seeing here is a recognition that I think we already know Americans are doing an average to below average job probably of saving for retirement, but I think there's some concerns about how employees understand what the value of their account is in a defined contribution plan, and also some concern about are Americans going to be successful at sort of creating their own income stream once they're in retirement? The days of the DB plan where your employer assumes all aspects of your retirement, the saving of the money, the investing in the money, and the paying out of the money has all shifted to the individual. So the individual is now responsible for really doing their own saving, doing their own investing, and perhaps the one component that we don't talk about quite as much is, the payout are people going to be successful in the payout of their accounts? And then we'll walk through several sort of smaller components of the Secure Act that will probably, some of them will definitely impact everyone in their current plan. Oops. Okay. Oh, and I should say, Lindsay mentioned in the beginning using the Q&A feature. I think I'm going to go through the first couple slides here, and then I'll probably stop and Lindsay check in with you and see if there's any questions, address those, and then sort of keep moving along. All right, so one of the biggest changes is to multiple employer plans. And for anyone who doesn't know what's a multiple employer plan, this is a group of 2 or more employers who offer one plan to all of their employees. So, I think the idea here is that by coming together as a group, these employers hope that they can obtain some administrative efficiencies, perhaps scale for a lower price, and overall make it easier for them to offer an employee a plan. Now, this has been available before the Secure Act, so MEPs do exist, but the difference is they removed this requirement that all the employers have a commonality of interest. So prior to this, the employers all had to have something in common, whether it's being in the same industry or maybe they all are the same part of an association or something like that. So that rule of the commonality of interest has actually been removed. I think the idea being that a broader range of employers could hopefully step in and begin offering these. It also removed another important provision in MEPS that was sort of referred to, has always been referred to as the one bad apple rule. The one bad apple rule said that if one of the employers within the MEP violated some rules, the entire plan could potentially be disqualified. So as you can imagine, that would be a pretty, while MEPs exist, that one bad apple rule is a pretty big disincentive for employers to participate in them because they don't want to join and find out that their plan gets disqualified for something that they have no control over. So I think removing that component was pretty important. So the final thing that the MEPS did was it's going to begin offering a new kind of plan that's called a pooled employer plan. So MEPS will still exist, but then we'll also have PEPs. And these will be available for plan years starting after December 31. And really what a PEP is you're going to have one organization or one plan sponsor that will sort of be the fiduciary responsible for all aspects of the plan, and then employers can join that. I think it's going to be interesting what the impact is of all of this. I think if these PEPs truly can provide lower cost and decrease administrative burden, I think they could be very popular. I think we'll have to see who begins offering these. I think associations have shown some interest, other organizations, and I think they'll come together and probably come up with some creative ways to offer these plans to a group of people. So I think there's a lot of guidance that's still needed on these from the Department of Labor. So that'll be coming in over time. And, as long as some of those benefits can be achieved, I think this change to the MEPs might have a positive impact on getting some of those small employers to offer plans. The next thing that the Secure Act does, as far as, again, encouraging smaller employers to begin offering these plans, is a couple tax incentives that I'll touch on here real quick. So when we talk about small employers, they're referring to employers with 100 employees or less. And there are 2 changes that have been provided. First is the possible tax credit for starting a new retirement plan was increased from $500 to $5,000. So that's a pretty significant jump to encourage these smaller employers to set up a plan. And then the second one is a new $500 tax credit will be available for employers who add the auto roll feature to an existing plan. So if they automatically enroll employees when they start, they'll be entitled to that $500 tax credit. And each of these are available to employees for 3 years after the change is made. So whether they start the plan or add auto enroll. So Lindsay, I'm going to stop there for 1 second before I get into the lifetime income and just check and see if there are any questions so far.
Sure, we do have one question. The question is, do these rules affect Oregon Saves or the Oregon Saves program, which, as you know, is a small employer option?
I would actually have to look into that. I don't know how this will coordinate with existing state plans like that.
Sounds good. We'll make sure we get back to the question asker then about that.
So I'll have to look into that.
Okay, so that was our only question as of right now.
All right. Okay, so the next thing that I mentioned was some of the changes in the lifetime income options. And the first requirement here is a requirement that employers provide plan participants illustrations showing monthly payments. So I apologize if you can hear my dog barking in the background. I'm not sure what she's barking at, but so really the concept of lifetime income, I think what they're trying to do is really educate people on what lifetime income is. So what this is going to require is that employers provide a statement, probably on the statement, showing the monthly payment that an employee could receive if they annuitize their full plan balance. So there's significant guidance that's going to be needed on this from the DOL, I think, before we really understand what this is going to look like. In fact, the timing on this and looking at the regulation, it's probably going to be as far as 2 years away. The rules state that this will become effective 12 months after the DOL does 3 things. They have to provide interim final rules. They have to provide model disclosures. And along with those model disclosures, they have to provide assumptions that employers can use to make all these disclosures. So all 3 of those things have to be completed. Once those 3 are completed, then the provision becomes effective 12 months after that. So it could be as much as 2 years until this comes to fruition and people have to start doing it. This is an interesting one because I think a lot of plan providers already offer illustrations, and a lot of them offer very good illustrations. So it'll be interesting to see how those coordinate with each other. So I think there's more to come on this, but it definitely shows the interest in trying to have people understand, you know, they get their statement and they see this big pot of money, and sometimes they mistakenly think that they're in a good spot to retire. And I think we know sometimes that's not necessarily the case. I think this is really going to illustrate, you know, where they stand as far as retirement. But like I said, there's some things that need to get ironed out. You know, I think there's some challenges, just some of the things that I think about. I don't know about the idea of showing the annuitization of the full balance. You know, I think a lot of times when someone is entering retirement, if they do create a lifetime income stream, they typically don't do it with their full balance. They do it with a partial balance to sort of, you know, the typical guidance is to sort of cover your basic expenses for life to make sure that you don't ever outlive those. So that's one thing that I think will require a little additional education. And then the other piece that I think is going to be a challenge for employees is, you know, if they get their statement and it continues to say that they're going to get, you know, X, you know, whatever, $1,000 a month, if the plan doesn't offer an annuity within it, then I think the employee is going to be left wondering, well, wait a minute, I've been told repeatedly that I can get this amount of monthly income. Where do I get it? So hopefully there will be some additional guidance on some of those questions that I've seen as outstanding. The other big change really has to do with accessibility of annuity or lifetime income options within a retirement plan. I think in the nonprofit and 403B world, there have been annuities offered quite a bit. That's not always been the case in more the for-profit or 401k side. And there was a good reason for it. Employers were reluctant to provide any lifetime income options within the plan due to concerns over the liability, their fiduciary liability associated with their selection of the annuity provider. You know, I think the thought there is if an employer were to select a company to be providing lifetime income today and someone annuitizes, what happens if that insurance company is no longer able to meet their demands 20 years from now when they're still expecting lifetime income? And this change will provide a safe harbor for that decision, and there's some guidance around what that looks like and what a company would need to do to take advantage of that. We are actually planning on providing some additional information to all plan sponsors that gets into more detail on how they can elect that, especially if they already have an annuity option within their plan, and they have to do certain things to take advantage of that. We will provide additional guidance on that. Now, the one thing, I think this is a very positive step in providing this safe harbor. There has been a fair amount of research to show that plan participants definitely tend to select an annuitization or lifetime income stream when it is offered within their employer's retirement plan, as opposed to having to take their money out of the plan and then go try and find somewhere to purchase lifetime income. So, you know, I think it's, again, we're going to need some additional guidance on this as well. But I think it's very much in line with what the goals of the Secure Act were in providing people better education and better access to lifetime income streams. So next, I wanted to walk through some of the several other provisions that will impact defined contribution plans. The first one here is some changes to the required minimum distribution rules. It extends the age from 70 and a half of the year the individual turns 70 and a half to the year the individual turns 72. Now, this is only for individuals who attain age 70 and a half after 12/31/2019. So if any employees turn 70 and a half, say in November or December of 2019, they're still gonna have to take their RMDs. So only if you turn 70 and a half after December 31, 2019 will this provision apply to you. Next, we have a provision related to long-term part-time workers. And I think this one has had some folks a little concerned just because of the way they track part-time workers, or maybe rather don't track part-time workers, and the need to actually start tracking some of these individuals who are part-time. The good news, and I'll walk through it, is that not to kick the can down the road, but this won't become effective for quite a while, probably until 2024, just because of the manner in which it'll be implemented. Now, what does this require the employer to do if someone does become eligible for the plan? So what does this long-term part-time worker get if they meet the requirements that we'll talk about in a minute? Really what they get is just the opportunity to have access to make voluntary contributions to the retirement plan. They don't get to participate in any employer contributions. They'll be removed from discrimination testing and things like that. It's just simply a way to give them access to the ability to save within the plan should they want to do so. So an eligible employee, as it says on the slide here, is anyone who worked over 500 hours or more during 3 consecutive 12-month periods. So it really does have to be a long-term employee who's worked at least three years with 500 hours. Now, I mentioned there's some time before it becomes effective. So the effective date for this provision is plan years after December 31, 2020, and you're not required to consider years of service before January 1, 2021. And that's why I said effectively, really no one can become eligible to be put into the plan until January 1, 2024. All right, moving on. This one's an interesting one. There's a provision that increases the maximum percentage contribution an employer can require through auto enroll and auto save arrangements. So it's changed from 10% to 15%. The only reason I say this one is interesting, I haven't seen any plans that auto roll or auto save people up to 10%, but you know, I guess now if someone wants to, they can put it up to 15%. So we'll see how much this one's used. The next one is, again, just a sort of an administrative item for employers that offer the safe harbor non-elective contributions. There's just some provisions that change some of the annual reporting requirements. Also makes it a little easier for these plans to amend or make changes to their safe harbor contributions during the plan year. Prior to this, they could only make changes at the beginning of the plan year. So it just loosens up some of the rules around that. Going back to required minimum distributions, there was another change related to, and this one actually sort of negatively impacts people, especially individuals. There was another change to the required minimum distribution rules for non-spouse beneficiaries. So the spousal rights under RMD still continue of deceased participants requires all distributions. The entire account needs to be distributed within 10 years of the participants in death. And what this does is eliminate sort of a financial planning tool that a lot of people were using called a stretch IRA. People would name a beneficiary, a young beneficiary for their retirement plan. And then that beneficiary in the past was able to use their life expectancy for taking the payments out. So as you can imagine, if a young person, you know, they have a very long life expectancy, when you do the math on what their minimum distribution would have been, it would be quite small. So this change will actually boost the amount of income tax coming into the federal government by forcing all of these individuals that maybe were going to try and stretch that IRA or stretch that retirement plan distribution out, you know, for 30, 40, 50 years, they're now going to have to take it out in 10 years. So this is, I'd say of everything in the Secure Act, this is the only one that maybe could be perceived as negative for people. I think everything else is pretty positive. But this is effective for employees who die after December 31, 2019, with the exception there for government and collectively bargained plans. We've got just a few more changes here, and then we will open it up for questions. You know, one interesting provision prohibits plan loans through credit cards. This is just simply a statement sort of saying, you know, we don't want you to use your retirement account like it's a checking or savings account. It's just a provision trying to limit the ability of employees to easily access their retirement plan before they're using it for retirement. Next one, the significant changes in the penalties for failing to file certain plan returns. So everyone out there, you want to make sure that you are filing everything in a timely fashion. Just as an example of one of the changes, the penalty, this is a big change. The penalty for failing to file your 5500 goes from $25 a day up to $250 a day. So these are some pretty significant penalties, but I'm sure all of you turn everything in on a timely basis, so you'll never have to be worried about that. The next provision is one that allows for penalty-free withdrawals, so not tax-free withdrawals, penalty-free withdrawals up to $5,000 for birth or adoption-related expenses. So this is a new in-service with, it's not even in service, I don't think. It's a new withdrawal provision that allows people access to $5,000. Again, they still have to pay taxes on it, but they won't have to pay the 10% penalty in the year of the birth or the adoption. Now, there is a provision, and this is the piece that we're going to need some additional guidance on. There is a provision that the employee can reimburse the plan for the withdrawal. And the reason I think we need some guidance on this is to understand, you know, who's responsible for tracking that the employee took this money out. You know, if you think about it, someone having a child through, you know, childbirth or adoption might be thinking about, or they're probably fairly young, And, you know, it might not be until 20 or 30 years later that they say, hey, you know what, I have an extra $5,000. I think I'd like to pay that back. So I do expect some additional guidance on that item as well. And then the final thing that we have is a provision allowing an employer that terminates their 403B custodial account to distribute the account in kind to the participant. So basically, all this means is that the contract is that custodial account is taken out of the retirement plan. So it's no longer a retirement plan asset, and it's just held individually by the former employee. And this has been done in the past with annuity contracts. It just hadn't been applied to custodial accounts. So I think this is a welcome change for any 403B plan that is using custodial accounts. If they're trying to terminate the plan, this sort of prevented them from ever being able to terminate it. This would help them have the ability to do that. So that covers the majority of the provisions that will impact you in a DC plan. I'm going to see if there's any questions for Lindsay, and if not, we'll wrap it up a little early. But Lindsay, do we have questions?
We do. We have a small handful of questions. So the first one is, do employers get the $500 tax credit for auto enroll for each of the 3 years? So a total tax credit of $1,500.
Yes.
Awesome.
That was an easy one. I don't know that I need to expand on that one. That one's been pretty clear. Yeah, both starting the plan and the $500 tax credit are available for 3 years. You know, I think again, the only caveat I would say on this is there could be guidance coming out on all of these things, but that was one that was effective immediately, so I don't anticipate that changing.
Great. All right, our next question is, tax credits are not effective incentives for small, not-for-profit organizations. Are there any provisions that address this gap?
Not that I'm aware of, certainly not in the Secure Act. So unfortunately, no, I mean, I think that's a good point. But yeah, that's not addressed in here.
All right, see. Our next question, we use a third party to update and maintain our plan. Are there any elements of the Act that require implementation this year effective in 2020?
Do you mean like plan updates or plan amendments?
The person may need to clarify their question. I'm not sure. I'm just reading from what we have here. Let's see if they happen to clarify. Oh, yeah, she says yes, plan updates.
I think everyone will need to take a look at their plan document. You know, the one that comes to mind is the birth and adoption provision is one that is available now. I'm honestly not completely clear, and I've read some things that have agreed with this. I'm not sure if an employer specifically has to opt into that or if it's just generally available to everyone. My expectation is that if an employer didn't want to offer that, they certainly could choose not to offer that withdrawal option. And if that's the case, then I would anticipate that would have to be drafted right into the document. My recommendation, especially on the birth and adoption piece, is to, I would probably hold off on using that until there's clarification on that repayment provision. I think we need to understand that a little better and just be sure that everyone understands how that's being tracked, when the employee can take advantage of that, and things like that. We are going to be providing some of that additional guidance on how to take advantage of the lifetime income safe harbor. I think we'll go ahead and include probably some additional information, though, on all of this to highlight any provisions that would require specific amendments to the plan document.
Okay. We still have 3 more questions as of right now. Are auto-enroll, auto-save percentages mutually exclusive of the employer match percentage?
Could you repeat that one?
Are auto-enroll, auto-save percentages mutually exclusive of the employer match percent?
So the auto enroll and auto save is an employee contribution that would sit side by side the employer contribution. So if you have a matching contribution of 5% and you're using auto enroll at 3%, then you would match up to 3%. Then as that auto save goes up each percentage point, you would match. I'm not sure I'm answering that question. The person might have to clarify a little bit, but auto save and auto enroll refer to not requiring, the employee can opt out, but an auto save provision is really just designed to encourage higher participation, with the idea that if you just automatically put them in the plan when they start, then they won't opt out and they will continue to participate.
The question asker clarifies, saying, meaning if the auto enroll is 10%, that does not mean the company match is also 10%.
Oh, no. And that was why I made the comment on that one. Like I said, I've seen some really good auto enroll and auto save plans. I just haven't seen one that goes all the way up to 10%. I think a lot of them you'll see start at 3%. And then, so auto enroll is the auto, get them into the plan. Auto save is the ratcheting up of that savings. So, a lot of times you'll see them maybe start at 3%, and then maybe each year after they'll add a percent. So in, year 2, they go to 4%, year 3, 5%. There might be some of you out there who have them. I haven't seen many up past 7 or 8%. That's getting close to the 10. But yeah, that is just strictly an employee contribution.
Great. Next question. Do parents have a limited time to request the $5,000 distribution after the birth adoption of their child, or is this just the 1 year from date of birth?
It is the 12 months from the date of birth or adoption. That's everything that I've read on it. I did see one thing that if both parents have a retirement plan, they can each do it. So if they want to get 10,000 out from each person's plan, they can do that.
Okay. The last question we have right now is, do these changes apply equally to 401k and 403b plans?
Okay, so that's a good question. There was one provision, and it's escaping me right now, that was that I've seen some information that says it's only available, or it's not available for 403b plans, and unfortunately it's escaping me what it is. So I might have to send an email to the group. It was a provision that that may have been an oversight. So I think that's why it's not jumping out at me, because I think the thought was that there could be some future legislation or some regulations that would incorporate that. I just can't remember which one it was. I apologize. It wasn't lifetime income, but I'll look that up and get back to that. Other than that, I think everything I've seen indicates that these are all available for 401k and 403b plans.
Okay. We have someone who says LTPT does not apply to 403b, if that's what you were thinking of.
I think that's right, but I'll have to double check that.
Okay.
So, all right.
These are all the questions we have. So if anybody has, we can hang on for maybe just one more minute and see if anybody populates the Q&A. If not, we can call it good.
Okay, and if anyone else is typing questions, that's great. I'll go ahead and take those, but I would close by saying, this was really just the first, the first iteration of sort of what we're seeing in the Secure Act. Multnomah Group, we will continue to monitor it throughout the year. Like I said, we're going to have some further guidance, especially as it relates to the lifetime income options. For those of you who already have annuity options, lifetime income options in your plan, we want to make sure that you are in a position to take advantage of that safe harbor. And as other changes and other things develop, we will include periodic updates on those as well. So I do want to thank everyone for joining today. I know you all have busy schedules, and I hope you found this helpful. If you do have any additional questions after this closes, feel free to reach out to me or your Multnomah consultant.
Great. We don't have any additional questions, so we can close.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.